Reverend Joyce, nice to see you. Joyce and I have known each other for quite some time. We went to an ongoing ministers' conference about, what did you say, 12 years ago? So it's been a magnificent time. And you guys, holy cow, I'm joyful to be here. Look at this crowd. This is wonderful. Look around. Look at the energy that sits in this room. You don't think we're transforming the world? Oh, I tell you, we definitely are. And what great consciousness you have to have such a wonderful teacher as Dr. Edward. He is away on sabbatical, I understand. That's why I was called in to speak. It's interesting to note that I'm leaving here and going to Atlanta to speak for Dr. David Ault, who's going to be here speaking. So basically, as usual with Dr. Edward, he's a make-work project for me. So now I get to follow around all the guest speakers he's got here to go and fill in for them while he's taking a holiday. It's a wonderful thing. But actually, Reverend Joyce mentioned the white papers or the position papers that I write. And I got to tell you that Dr. Edwards sits on all of the committees that I have. Dr. Edwards in Cultural Integration, Social Action, which has got another name, but I can never remember what it is because it's so long, and all the good things that come with it. And he is a real taskmaster. And when I say he sits on those committees, I got to tell you, actually, he runs those committees. And he's just a marvelous human being, and he's one of my favorite people. If I were to retire and stop being a minister of a church or stop being the spiritual leader of Centers for Spiritual Living, I think I'd move to Santa Rosa and come here. So we're doing the themes, which we put together, and they're a magnificent group of themes. And I know Edward, before he left, already got the themes ready for 2018, which gives you an idea of just what a dedicated soul he is. But I'll share with you that today the theme we've got is dealing with conditions. And I've just got to let you know, I have a lot of experience with dealing with conditions. A lot of experience. It seems to me that my entire life is about dealing with conditions, things showing up in my life which I don't necessarily like or which I don't necessarily want, and then finding ways to be able to transform who I am so that I can change that condition and change that experience. Does anybody here have a condition they're dealing with right now? I think it's pretty much unanimous. There's always something. There's something in the pathway of our lives that's there. And we know, I mean, we've been through the story. We know that it exists for the purpose of us being able to learn what it is that is necessary to expand our consciousness to a greater idea so that we can have a greater experience. The problem is that, I don't know about you, but I believe it all the time intellectually, but I don't always act on it all the time. I don't always practice it. I quite often find myself in a situation, as a matter of fact, where it's almost like I relish and enjoy the pain and anguish of a situation because I know what the answer is, but somehow or other, when something occurs in my life, I have a tendency to kind of push it around and keep it in front of me for sometimes hours, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, sometimes months. And then all of a sudden I'm reminded and I remember, you know, I could actually do something about this, but in order to do it, I have to change what I'm doing and what I'm believing and what I'm holding on to be true, what I'm actually embracing as a belief system in my life. My best metaphor, the greatest metaphor, which I'm going to share with you, I shared it at the first service and I'll share it at the third as well. My greatest story, which for me reflects where I go and how it works, is the story of the cowboy in the Old West, who pretty much grew up on the range with his cows and didn't get to come into town very often and didn't really know much about anything beyond cows and country and things that he hangs out in. And one day he came in to get some supplies, and when he comes in to get supplies, he goes to the local dance hall and spends the evening out. And at that particular time, in that era, the turn of the last century, what happens, he shows up and Mr. Edison's moving pictures are in town. And for the first time ever, and nobody really knew about them before, but they're showing in the dance hall. And so they put them up, and they put them on a screen in the dance hall, and they begin to run the movie. And you know the movie. The movie has an antagonist, it has a protagonist, and it has a victim. You know that? You know, and the protagonist is Snidely Whiplash. And the antagonist is Dudley Do-Right, the sweet, young, good-looking young man. And the victim, the love, the heart, is Tess Trueheart. And so the movie starts running, and as it begins to run, sure enough, it gets to that stage in that place that movie runs to. And we all know it because every movie ever since basically picks up on the same themes and the same ideas. And to a large degree, our lives pick up on the same themes. The only thing is we get to play all three parts, which is really interesting. But the time comes where what happens is Tess Trueheart, who has somehow or other been brought under the spell of Dudley Do-Right, finds herself in a situation where she finds out what an incredible cad he actually is, and therefore tries to break away. But when she tries to break away, Snidely Whiplash will have nothing but revenge about it. And so she starts crying out for help from beautiful Dudley Do-Right, who's off in the distance. And we know that the end result must be that Snidely Whiplash takes Tess Trueheart to the rail yard and ties her to the rails. And there she's on the rails, and Snidely is hee-hee-heeing and sneering and saying, now you'll get yours. And Tess is screaming, oh, please, please save me. And Dudley comes riding up on his horse to save her. So as Dudley rides up on his horse to save her, and the indignancy of this situation gets so bad, the cowboy sitting in the dance hall jumps up out of his seat, pulls his 6-gun from his holster, and starts blazing away at the screen. Isn't that what we do? Aren't we constantly trying to deal with the effect instead of the cause? Aren't we always over there, looking at it, and we are comfortable in the idea that it's something that needs to be changed out there? And for my case, and I'll speak totally for myself, not like you beautiful avatars who never do anything wrong, what happens in my case is that's the ball I kick up the street, the can I kick up the street. What I see is I see the effect, and I begin immediately to work on how I'm going to deal with the effect. And what I begin to do is I begin to think that somehow or other I can make all this work. I can make it and I can fix it. The fact that it's in my life and it's a reflection of my consciousness is secondary. I think my consciousness can actually overcome it and overpower it because I forget that there is a power in the universe that is greater than I am and that I can use it and it can use me. And when I surrender that and give that up, what happens to me is I actually try to change something without changing my mind or my belief system or what goes on with it. Anybody else got that situation? 3 of us. Okay. So what happens, I tell my Science of Mind students, as a matter of fact, I tried to put together an oak tree, but I couldn't get the molecules to fit. And yet there's a power in the universe that knows how to do it in perfection. And when I can surrender myself to that perfection, allow that to happen, the end result is everything falls and flows into perfection. So the cowboy jumps up and he fires away at the screen. And you know that all he's doing is creating holes in the screen. That's all that's happening. The play goes on over top of it. And you could actually go and you could tear down the screen, you could rip it down, and still the film projector would continue to play it out, although you couldn't see it, but it would be playing in the background, that subliminal way. And in my case, unless you change, my understanding is that unless I change the consciousness behind it, then the end result is the play's going to continue to go on no matter what. I might not see it, and that's my biggest excuse is I think that I fixed the problem over here, and 2 weeks later it shows up over here. Or I think I fixed the problem over here, and 6 years later it shows up over here. You know what I'm talking about. Same man, different face. You know what I'm talking about. Same situation over and over and over and over again. And it's because we didn't change the cause, we changed the effect. And we know that the answer is you run upstairs and you go to the projector room and you get into the projector room and you look at it, and there you'll see that there is a film that's sliding over top of a light. And our concept or our belief sometimes is that if I only turn off the light, then this will happen. Have you noticed how depression is a big issue in the world today? That's people trying to turn off the light. And the light is that spirit, that divinity, that truth that resides within us that owes only one thing to do, and that is to emanate and shine. And that's the truth of who each and every one of us is. And the problem isn't the light, and the problem isn't the screen. The problem is the film, our thoughts that ride over top of it and go with it. Now, the last service, I talked about our need to be able to love and embrace our condition, to be able to see it. And if we love and embrace our condition, and our condition might be one of joy and happiness, and you love and embrace that, then your energy draws and attracts to it everything that's required to be able to expand it, because it is our energy that creates the form of our experience as we put it out there. So therefore, if you're prosperous and happy and joyful, and you recognize and give gratitude towards it, you will draw and attract into your circumstance everything like that to continue to develop and grow it. And if you do not be grateful for it, what will happen is that it will have to reside on its own energy. Being a living idea, it has no problem, but anything else from the outside that pops up is going to have the energy that'll draw and attract it to it. So in order to dissolve the conditions that we don't want in our lives, it demands that we actually change the film of the way that we think and begin to project something different into the world and some other way of being and some other life. And like I said, when I talked in the first service, I talked about our need to stop hating our condition and start embracing it so that what happens is it develops and builds. Now, I've got 3 conditions I want to talk about this week, it only feels like a week, that I want to talk about today. And those 3 conditions won't all fit into 20 minutes, so I'm going to do a different condition every single service. So stay tuned. You can ask about the last one because they don't film it. You can rewatch the film for this one if you want, or you can ask about the next one, or stay on if you want. But here's the key. The key is that the conditions in our life are variable. We have a lot of different circumstances that show up. I can remember when Deborah and I started our center in Kelowna, British Columbia. And we started it, and 12 people showed up for the first service, of which 8 were members of my family. And I had 2 little kids, two very young children, and Deb and I were gung-ho into this, and our first offertory was $75, thanks to my sister, who tithes 50, and the end result is that for that week, we had $75 to live on, and the 12 people dwindled down to 6 before it began to grow again. So they didn't like me. What can I say? So there we have that situation, that circumstance. So we're developing and building the center. But there was this one couple that showed up in the very, very beginning. And oh, they were sweet people. And we just adored them. And they were so helpful. You know, when we showed up, we were in a little tiny hall, and what they would do is they'd set up the chairs, they'd make the coffee, they'd do all the volunteer work that was happening. And in turn, what Deborah and I would do, my wife Deborah and I, what we would do is we became very, very close with them. And we'd counsel them for no charge. We married them without charging them. We would give all of our time. We'd spend an incredible amount of time with this couple. And they were there for about 6 months, and the church is beginning to grow, and it's feeling really, really good. And at that particular time, because of the circumstances in my life, I was really focused on a condition in my life called money. It was really irritating because I was always trying to find a way to be able to make ends meet. We started the center and we didn't have very much. We'd moved from a farm in Southern California and we'd moved up to Kelowna. So we were kind of relying upon the income that came from the center to keep body and soul together. And so as we were doing this and progressing, it occurred to me that the first thing that I needed to do in order to be able to be functioning prosperous would be to get rid of all the debt that I had in my life. Because as a California farmer, and it wasn't a small farm, it was 1,100 acres. So I was owed a lot of money and I owed a lot of money. It's just the way my condition always happened to operate and always happened to work at that particular point. So I can remember that I wanted desperately to get rid of an end debt in my life. And so I remember I went on this spree of treatment work and contemplation and meditation every single day to eradicate debt in my life. And sure enough, you know what happened? Oh, yes, you do. The debt just started to mount, seemed to grow. How can this be? I'm a good person. I tithe. I go to church. I pray. How come this is growing? How come it's always expanding? And the reason, of course, it's expanding is because there was something that I needed to learn to be able to transform the effect, and my prayer work was all centered on the effect rather than centered on the consciousness of the learning and the ability to grow. Am I making sense? And so what occurred was this lovely couple that showed up, and I was working on the eradication of debt from my consciousness. This lovely couple showed up, and we were growing, and the church looked like it was doing good, and we were finally heading the right direction. The debt kept mounting. My treatment kept growing strenuously. You know the treatments I'm talking about. Surely you've done them yourself. The prayers that where you're supposed to focus on the divine, you're supposed to focus on the light and the goodness and the joy, and instead the whole treatment seems to be focused on the effect. I believe in God and absolutely nothing else. I know that I'm unified with this power that I call God, and I speak my word right now, knowing that debt is eradicated from my experience, that I no longer have bills in my life, and all the energy goes to what I'm treating to be rid of, as opposed to what I actually know. The treatment actually should be, I realize and accept that I am a living individualization of the light itself, and that therefore all things come to me with ease and joy. And when I get that feeling, then that becomes the creative urge. When I get the other feeling, all I'm doing is drowning. All I'm doing is fighting frustration. So this couple's there, and they're doing all this volunteer work, and they're great. And one Sunday, I go to church, and they're not there. And I think, no word, no nothing, no conversation. They just didn't show up. So I thought, well, they took a Sunday off. That's understandable. Some people take Sundays off. Nobody here, but some people take Sundays off. So I go, okay, that's fine. So the next Sunday comes, and they don't show up again. I think, oh, this is kind of serious. I should do something about this. This doesn't look right. So I pick up the phone, and I phone, and there's no answer. So the next Sunday comes, and they don't show up for the third Sunday either. And now I'm really becoming agitated and worried. And so I phone again, and I keep constantly phoning, and no answer, no response, no reply whatsoever. So I think, oh dear, they must hate me. And all my energy goes to that. All my energy goes to the lack. All my energy goes to whatever's there. And so I have a practice. I do spiritual practice 2 hours a day, every single day. So I'm in my spiritual practice in my backyard, and I'm doing my contemplation. And I'm going through my contemplation, which is really a basic concept, because what I do is at that particular time, as I look at the conditions in my life, and when I look at the conditions in my life, I clear myself and I say, okay, what is it within me that needs to transform in order to transform the effect of my experience and what needs to go on? I'm sure every person here does their own work 2 hours a day. So I'm doing that, and I'm working through that, and I'm going at it, and this statement jumps into my head. It just pops up out of nowhere. My mind kind of drifts to this couple that were helping us out. And it drifts to that idea suddenly of that feeling of betrayal or abandonment or loss or whatever else there's there. And so I'm sitting there, and in my contemplation, this statement pops up into my head. And it said, after all I did for them, they left. I found out, by the way, where they went. They became Mormons. And I like Mormons, but... And they're back at the church now, but they decided to become Mormons for a while, so that's fine. But that after all I did for them pops into my head. And then it occurred to me that to deal with conditions, you're not dealing with the effect of the condition. The effect looks like this. But every coin has two sides. Every belief has two ways that it comes together. And the tendency is that I was working on no debt, which meant I didn't want to owe anybody anything. I wanted to have no debt. Me, don't owe you. But I obviously had a consciousness that said, it's okay for you to owe me. And when that realization hit, all of a sudden the filter in the film transformed. Because the recognition became obvious that what the situation in front of me was I would never get rid of debt unless I actually stopped believing about debt. And that my issue wasn't the pain or the anguish of lack that was coming into my life. The issue was my adherence to doing things for people and expecting return and then being disappointed when the return didn't come in. Remember that condition I asked if you had earlier? Are you looking at both sides of that coin, or are you looking at only one? Are you looking for more love in your life, but you're not prepared to give more love? Are you looking for more fulfillment in your life, but you're not prepared to accept and embrace the fulfillment you have, or to give other people the power to have fulfillment as well? Two sides to every coin. So then I got to look at it, and I decided right then and there that I needed to go through a transformation in the way that I did things. So what I started to do was I refused to do anything for somebody until I was clean and clear within my own soul that I was doing it because I am the emanation of the light. I am not doing it because I need something back in return. So suddenly people would phone me up for counseling, and I would say, oh, I got to think about that. I'll let you know. Let me call you back. And then what I would do is I would go into the den of my own mind, and I would cleanse myself of any expectation came in return. I would clear myself as to what my vision, my direction, my ministry, my calling was in my life, which we all have. And then what I would do is I would step into that calling, and I would show up without an expectation of anything coming back again. It got to the point, as a matter of fact, within months, by the way, I was totally debt-free. It just fell away. I don't know how it went. I don't know how it disappeared. I have no concept whatsoever. I couldn't possibly tell you how I went from the amount of debt I had to nothing. It just disappeared. Because that divinity flows through. That light can only attract what it is that's fed, what you believe and what fits in there. And if you believe somebody else owes you, then you believe in debt, and it's almost guaranteed that you in turn need to owe somebody else and live your life from that point. So I started to live my life in a cleaner, clearer way. As a matter of fact, my brother came to me years later, and I, by the way, have zero debt, none, zip. I make special considerations for mortgages, but even that's gone. But the thing is that I just refused to do it. I wouldn't show up here with an expectation of return unless I was clean and clear in my own consciousness that I was here for a purpose that served me. And I don't mean that to sound selfish, but when I say served me, I need to know that it's part of my ministry, it's part of my calling, it's part of my service to life. And if I show up expecting that something's going to come back to me in return, then I am out of integrity with my own belief system, and what I'm doing is opening myself up to live in debt again. And you can do this for every single situation, a condition that exists in your life. There are two sides to it. And when you cleanse yourself of one side, the other side presumably should be cleansed as well. But it doesn't work that way. And it's always the other side that you're not looking at. It's not that I owe you that is my issue. It is that I think you owe me that is my issue. And that's what needed to be healed. So my brother comes to me, as a matter of fact, and he wants to borrow some money. And so I had the money, and I said, okay, I can't lend it to you. And he said, what do you mean you can't lend it to me? You've got the money. Lend me the money. I only want it for 2 weeks. I'll get it back to you. I said, no, I cannot lend it to you. You don't understand. I don't believe in debt. For me to be able to give you, for me to be able to have you have this money, I have to give it to you. Hey, well, sure. but I needed to work. So I needed to go, and I needed to sit in my meditative idea, my contemplative, my treatment work. And what I needed to do is I needed to clean myself totally of the fact that there was going to be some kind of connection or string that was attached to this. And when I got to that point, which took about 10 days, I put the money in an envelope. I went to his house, knocked on the door, handed it to him, said, here, I want you to have this. Thank you so much. And went away and never bothered me again. Of course, it came back to me shortly thereafter, pressed down and flowing over, which is how the universe works. But it wasn't my expectation that that would work. It was what I needed to do for my self-discipline to transform the consciousness that I had that was wrapped up in my life, so that I would stop dealing with the effect of it and actually start dealing on the belief system and the veil that I had, which is called my film, which allows me to be able to be who it is that I choose to be and live my life according to the way that I choose to live it. Am I making sense? So when one deals with conditions, one has to understand that there's steps that they have to do, and that it's often not as simple as what you think it is. One of my teachers, Dr. David Walker, said that the mind is like a cluster of grapes. And he said, our tendency in this teaching is to believe that we can reach in around that cluster and find that one bad grape that we don't want and pluck it out and pull it out. He said, that's not the way this law works. How it works is you have to transform the entirety of the cluster. You have to know how to be able to change and be willing to change the truth of who you are and give up what it is that you've been holding on to in order to get a new experience back in return. I'll share with you is that I want nothing more for this world than each and every one of us to be able to deal with the conditions of our lives in a sensible, sane way. To stop shooting at the screen, which we see happening so often in so many places in so many different ways. To be able to rise above the effect and instead rise into the consciousness of that love, that light, that joy, that beauty, that truth of who we are, and become authentic and actualized as human beings, so that what we can actually do is move forward. Now, it's been 100 years or 120 years since Edison came out with the moving pictures, and we're quite accustomed to it now, and we would no longer even dream of standing up and shooting at the screen thinking that that would change something, because we know better, and when we know better, we do better. But I'm telling you that we need to start practicing doing better in our life and in our world, and stop dealing with the effect and start dealing with the cause behind it. We need to get to the nuclei of what goes on, which means in some way that, as Dr. Holmes said, give unto Caesar, or Shakespeare said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, give unto God what is God's. What we need to do is we need to realize that we have to give something up to get something. And what we usually have to give up is we have to give up a belief system that we're holding on and harboring to. I want this world to be that way. I want to be that way, and so I practice it. I practice it regularly, and I fail regularly. But I do my spiritual practice and get back on the beam and follow through again. I don't kick the can for 30 years anymore. Now I kick it for 3 minutes or 3 weeks or even 3 months, but it's not like it used to be, because I'm expanding and growing and changing my film. And I'm stopping dealing with the effect and starting to deal with the cause. So I share this with you with love and with honor, trusting that dealing with conditions is something that is necessary for each and every one of us, and that to be able to do it, in order to be able to become the people that we want to be, it requires that we do our spiritual practice and we work on it. It requires that we be prepared to give something away to get something back again. It requires that we actually open ourselves to understand that it's not as simple as we look at. And it requires that we recognize that the effect does not play a part. It is the cause that is the transformative issue. So I bless you. I thank you so much for inviting me here. And please know how loved and honored you are. God bless you. Thank you.